Be able to hear me better? I'll stop yelling. Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel, which is Packaging, Funding, and Distributing from Reality TV and Specials to Web Series and Indie Filmmaking. My name is Gary Goldberger, and I'm pleased to be the moderator. I'm a lawyer. I've had my practice for about 8 years. Before that, I did producing, and before that, I was an executive for many years with an international production and distribution company. We have a very well qualified and diverse panel here. We have the law firm of Fleming and Fleming, Yuri Fleming, Haley Dixon, Jane Fleming, and Mark Ordesky. You've got their biographies. So I won't ask them to go into any detail on their bios, but just so you can get the extent of what they bring to the table and their level of expertise, I'd ask each of you to give maybe about a 30-second description of not so much your background, but what it is that you're doing now. Yuri, you want to start, please?
Yeah, sure. So my practice ranges from animated motion picture, live action motion pictures, to a lot of unscripted programming, whether it's representing a showrunner on the show, on-screen talent of the show, or a production company that's delivering the show to a network, and everything in between.
Nice. I work at Fremantle, and I work on the international division, Fremantle Media International, and I oversee North American acquisitions, programming acquisitions. So essentially, I look to acquire scripted, non-scripted programming from all different kinds of platforms and broadcasters that's produced here for first run in the U.S. and then to sell, distribute internationally.
I am a film and television producer with my partner, Mark Ordesky, so I'm going to steal his introduction.
Yes, please.
We make films, actually of all sizes, and television. Recently had our show The Quest on ABC and are in the development stages of about 20 different projects right now.
Mm.
You don't get off without saying anything, Mark.
Really? Hello.
Fair enough.
High pressure.
And I would add just one footnote to what Jane said, is that Jane also over the years was a past president of Women in Film, and I believe is president emeritus, and helped build that organization into the very well-respected organization that it is today. I had written out some things to try to talk about, but they fooled me by putting no light up here. So if you see me peering down at this, you'll give me a break and understand why. Let's start, since the seminar title deals with packaging, funding, and distributing. Let's talk about packaging first. And generally, everybody on the panel, please chime in with your views. I'll have some questions that I'll ask to specific people, but if you want to say something, even if I haven't addressed it to you, by all means, feel free to do so. First, how would each of you define the word packaging used in the entertainment concept? Mark, you want to start on this one, please?
Sure. I mean, most broadly speaking, we typically define packaging as pulling elements into the orbit of a project. I mean, obviously, ultimately, when you package something, you've attached, motivating elements to your project, whatever that means. But usually, for a long span of time before you've actually attached people, you're simply drawing them into orbit, and hopefully close enough orbit that you can attract the financing and distribution that's ultimately your end goal.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that since we're dealing with such a wide sort of definition of different media, I think it's really justifying investment and bringing in either co-financing partners or talent or anything to justify investment at the level that you need it is packaging from the way we look at it.
Yep. I mean, being that I have the checkbook, that's my first question. It's like, who's writing it? Who's starring in it? And what have they done before? How do we make it attractive? Something we could pre-sell internationally, or something that we could ensure that's going to have legs and going to be also a returnable franchise?
I mean, I would concur with all those definitions. From a legal perspective, packaging is also doing it in a way that doesn't destroy your project or create a lot of baggage or creates a lot of headaches down the road. So you don't make any person that you meet at a party a producer right away. And if you do, please try to have something in writing.
And Mark and Jane, at what stage in a project's life will you think about packaging?
I mean, from the very minute we look at it, we came from New Line Cinema. Mark most famously was the executive producer of Lord of the Rings, which, nobody believes now, but Peter had to do an extraordinary job of packaging the idea of Lord of the Rings in order to get it financed. So we actually review any sort of story with who's the end user, and because depending on who the end user is, let's work backwards to figure out how much we need to package and at what level.
Yeah, because packaging, it's really a two-step dance. It's imagining the elements that will be motivating and then taking the right initial steps so that you position yourself as best you can for those elements when you're ready to make that move. So you want to start with the end in mind, as Jane says.
Because I think that it's about finding the right level for the material. And now that the title of our panel crosses so many different media, not all media needs to be Lord of the Rings. And so therefore you don't need to package it as such.
Which is a great lead into the question I was going to ask both you and Mark. More Mark to start with. Talk a little bit, Mark, about specifically what you had to do to package Lord of the Rings, since we all look at that and it may be that the initial thought of many in the audience would be, boy, Lord of the Rings, you don't have to do anything for that. It's such a well-known property. But what did you do to package that, and how much of that translates to doing a small independent film that people in the audience might be contemplating?
Sure. Well, on the most basic level, even something as big as Lord of the Rings is totally relatable to a movie or TV show at any scale. I can't take too much credit for the packaging of Lord of the Rings, because by the time even though it came into my orbit very, very early in its process, Peter and Jackson and Fran Walsh had been building it for 18 months to 2 years before it formally got out of Miramax and into sort of New Line's clutches. But ultimately, when it did come to us, it was the same sort of thing. The scripts, when we got them at New Line, were 2 scripts rather than 3. And there was a process of how that project was going to get priced to make it green lightable and what sort of elements needed to be had. I mean, most famously, people know this story. There's a thought that you needed, first, do we need big stars? Does Sean Connery need to be Gandalf to make this financeable? And there's a whole thought about whether that's really a good idea, as brilliant as Sean Connery is. If you're looking at him, you're looking at Sean Connery, you're not looking at Gandalf. And ultimately, the studio made the right decision, which was actually the counterintuitive one, which was to not have Mel Gibson as Aragorn, but to have Viggo Mortensen, not to have Sean Connery, but to have Ian McKellen. So I think it goes right to the heart of what we're talking about, is sometimes the most obvious answer that Hollywood gives is not the correct one, which is you should get the biggest star you possibly can. And that's not always the right answer.
And the other thing that Peter did, which is very applicable to any level of content, is that Peter built his team. And by the time he had rolled into New Line, he had built an extraordinary world-class team of artists and technologists and builders to say, like, look, not only are we going to package it with actors, but we're also packaging a team that's going to be able to deliver a creative vision that you've never seen before. Because although a lot of people don't remember, fantasy was dead. And the last fantasy movie had been Willow, and there were guys with, little people with hairy feet. So that was really what we were fighting against. And Peter, to his credit, and Mark and I call it the motivated creator test,
Right.
He had gone through and asked every question he could of himself before he walked in for New Line to ask the same questions.
And then what he really did, which everyone does, he had a really amazing proof of concept. He put together a 30-some-odd minute video, which basically showcased all the work of his amazing collaborators, like, Richard Taylor, and What a Workshop, and What a Digital, and how are you going to make the Hobbits look small? In all sales endeavors, there is no such thing as leaps of faith, only steps of faith, and you have to lay the stones. Mm-hmm. So he basically did what Jane said. He anticipated every question he could get asked. He had the answers already. So when people want to say yes, ideally. So if you give them no way to say no, your odds of getting a yes increase.
And one more thing to add is that proof of concept is exactly what allowed him to attract talent, which obviously we're talking about today, is how do you package things. If he had not proven to Elijah Wood that he wasn't going to make him look foolish, it might have been a different casting story.
And how does that translate to people who want to do a low budget independent film? What can they do to help move their project along?
Well, it's the same idea. I think it's going through the steps to prove out your vision. So obviously the screenplay is your first and most important tool that you can use. But, we make sure that every project that comes through our door, that our filmmakers put together lookbooks, that they put together, aspects of the team that actually do serve and aren't baggage. They can actually tell what's unique about their particular vision. And then I think that it's also having some realistic expectation of size and scale.
Yeah, we definitely believe in pricing your content appropriately for your goals. I mean, obviously we grew up at New Line, and Jane was actually quite famously architected the whole green light protocol at New Line at the time. So the idea of having a sense of what you're trying to get a yes for, and do you have the correct tools in your toolbox to get that yes, is kind of crucial. And if you don't have that information, luckily, thanks to forums like this and other resources, you can find out what is most likely to help you get a yes for your price.
Yeah. I mean, for those who are writers here too, it starts even before the screenplay and you deciding what you want to write about and how you want to write about it. Because once you understand what's your potential audience, what's your potential budget, then you got to write a screenplay that matches that vision and that reality. I mean, if you want to make, a coming of age story with absolutely nobodies, then you can't write a screenplay that's going to cost $50 million. If that's your vision, you have to write a screenplay that's realistically doable for less money. If that's the direction, if that's your vision. If you're doing a rom-com with 2 leads, then you can write a $50 million screenplay. But it even starts then thinking about who's going to populate this project on screen and off screen to make it doable.
I think that's excellent advice. Haley, you do a lot with web series and digital content. How can people package web series? It's a new medium. It's being invented and reinvented regularly. What would you tell people about how they can package web product?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing is story. And, because what we're trying to do is if we're taking a first run digital series in the US and we're taking it to linear broadcast, which is sell internationally, it has to stand up next to linear series that are, first run produced in the US. So has to have a narrative story, because a lot of the digital, first run digital productions are short form, they're bits and pieces, they don't actually link together to form a half hour or a 44-minute commercial slot for television. So it's having that story, it's having that narrative, and it's thinking about it before, right? Because a lot of the times people think, oh, well, I've already produced it, it's all in the can. How do I, take it to a secondary or tertiary window, right? Which is like, well, if you had thought about that before and you think about, what can I do now before I start production to ensure it has a life beyond short form? I'll give you an example. We launched a series called Park Bench with Steve Buscemi. He had this idea of doing a talk show on a park bench in New York with all his buddies. So AOL commissioned it, and it was a short form series, and they ordered, 12 or 14, 3 to 6 minute episodes. And we sat down with the producers before and we said, well, how do we make these into 622s or 822s so we can actually sell it? And what we decided to do was, before production started, we decided that the long form episodes were going to be the behind the scenes of Steve, directing it and sort of giving the direction. And so that would be the connecting tissue, I like to call it. It's going to connect all of the little vignettes together. So that's one of the things I would say.
Yeah.
So the message there is think about this ahead of time.
Yeah.
Whether
I had some people who shot 5 hours of a serial television show. I was like, well, can we sell this?
Right.
5 hours, 6, 8, 12, those are the slots. 5 hours, that's a really tough sell.
Yeah, and that's a big issue because there is no slot time in digital, right? I mean, it's however long it takes to tell the story, which is kind of cool, and that's awesome. But if you're going to try and sell it into a commercial broadcaster, they need to have a slot time. So it's, between 22 and 30 or 44 and 60, and just try and make it be between those two. Your life will be a lot easier.
Yeah, think about who your end user is and even a secondary end user, and tailor the project to that. Because otherwise, if you just make it how you want to make it and then try to find a home for it, you're going to have a much smaller chance of success. You always hear about people who get their passion projects made, but a lot more people get commercially feasible projects made than passion projects. And you can take a passion project and at least try to fit it into something commercial and hope that works. With a reality show, is the only way to get a reality show financed by going to a broadcaster and then having them license it? Or are there new ways of getting reality shows financed, such as private money or advertisers or anything else?
If a network is not, if you can't get the show financed by a broadcaster, I'm not quite sure whether you want to still pursue that project. You know, I mean, it's not like independent film where, you know, if the studio says no, but you still believe in it, and you find some people that believe in it, you could raise the money independently and then even raise a P&A fund and release it. And, you know, you have some avenues there. But on reality TV, it's TV. It's, you know, maybe in 2 or 3 years, you can do an over-the-top network and there'll be more options. But currently, your buyers are the broadcast networks. That's how you're going to recoup your funding. Fremantle's not going to touch it unless it's
I
got,
was going to say it exactly like that, but.
well, I can't because I don't represent it.
No, right, no, I mean.
The Fremantle to be very supportive and encouraging, and give you some
Yes.
tips, but they'll probably want you to come back once you have a U.S. broadcaster attached. So it's something to consider. Now, if you're going to do digital and you're going to do like vignettes, goes back to what we're talking about. You can finance that through sponsors, through brands, through equity, with perhaps the hope of making that jump to television, and that's happened, and we're seeing that more and more. Headline News, or HLN, sorry, is now kind of focusing their programming on taking short form web personalities, web content, and moving onto their platform. So as a way to launch something, it's definitely doable. But to produce a TV show and you want it to be on TV, you need a broadcaster.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. I mean, I think it just gives it validity, you know, I mean, it just says, okay, well, you know, we know it's actually going to be able to travel and be returnable and have that quality, you know, to it.
Is it feasible? I've talked to people who have come to me and said, I have somebody who wants to finance with private money a reality show for me that I can then take and try to shop. Is that a model that makes any sense whatsoever, or are people just wasting their time and money thinking about that?
Good luck.
Uh,
No.
Look, I think.
See, I tried to ask that in a way
Yeah.
that I didn't invite the answer.
No, I
but
think
that
it could
was
be,
the logic.
listen, if you have a good show, you have a good concept, a good piece of talent, and you can get some funding to help you put together a proof of concept, that's fantastic. And people will look at it, and you need that tape, you need that proof of concept. But don't go out there and produce 6 or 8 episodes of television and expect a broadcaster to come on board and, you know, put it on their air. You know, they want to be involved in it. So I would say yes, but do a really awesome 30-minute proof of concept sizzle, something that you can use as a sales tool.
Yeah, I mean, do not shoot a pilot. I mean, that is just a complete and utter waste of money. Because a pilot, basically, if you've spent $100,000, $150,000 on a pilot, you take it to a broadcaster's kind of stuck. They don't have a chance to give their input, which they all do. After all, that's their job. They're not just there to buy. They feel like they want to be involved in the process and get their imprint, and they think they know their viewers and what they want. So if you're going to do that, like she said, you know, do a proof of concept, a sizzle, spend.
Characters, you know.
Yeah, show the world that you're trying to show that your characters pop on screen and they work on camera. But I wouldn't spend more than $10,000 to $20,000 realistically. You don't need to have it broadcast quality. You don't need to color correct it. What it does, it just needs to show what you're thinking of, and then team up with a production company, or if you are a production company, team up with a network. Then they can take your idea and work with you in getting to something they want. Anything more than that's a waste.
As the new kids on the block in reality, all the networks have very clear mandates. And so you're really threading the needle. So if you can, exactly what you said, define the world in some form of sizzle and talk to them about what their mandates are, you're going to find you don't have a huge amount of buyers. So you really don't want to spend a lot of money trying to reach those few buyers.
Yeah, I can't stress this enough for people that don't already know it. You'd think, oh my gosh, there's proliferation of platforms and cable and network, and I've got 20 places I can take this, but you actually don't have 20 places you can take it, especially if I'm going to make a horror anthology show. Once you define what it is, you're going to find out you have about 6 places, and maybe you actually only have 3 during this year, 2015, because this year, 3 of your 6 have actually decided they're going to grow from a teenage, so information is everything. Having intel on the buyers and what they're looking for. And yes, people are always going to say yes to something that is awesome, but you don't want to bank on having the one bullseye thing that breaks through every single bit of rules to be, because even if you might do that, why would you build your whole business around doing that?
And on the flip side, if you happen to be a wonderful personality, or you know somebody that is a wonderful character, because go digital, you can very inexpensively, explore that in digital form. And then if it is at all interesting, there's always the room to grow it into something, but at least you're out there trying to build your own audiences.
Yeah, so instead of doing a pilot, you could actually put that funding towards doing a web series and trying to get traction on it. The other thing too is if any of you are developing formats, so actually formatted shows, animation is a great route. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see animated, promos and sizzles that really explain a concept incredibly
game
well.
shows?
Yeah, like game shows or talent-based, studio shows, or anything that is a very formatted show. Animation can do fantastic for proof of concept.
Two follow-ups, and I hope I can remember both of them by the time we finish with the first one. You had mentioned don't film a series, maybe do a proof of concept, maybe a 30-minute proof of concept, or do a sizzle reel. Talk about what, if any, is the difference between a 30-minute proof of concept and a pilot, or if that's too long for a proof of concept, or if people should really focus on a shorter 5-6 minute sizzle reel. What would you suggest that people focus on in terms of making something to show potential buyers?
Well, I think it depends on the project. If you have a game show format, you might want to do something that's longer, closer to 30 minutes than a 5-minute sizzle. If you're trying to show the progression between the rounds or some subtlety in gameplay, then that's okay. If you're doing a docu-series, you don't need half an hour. You need 5 to 7 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, just to introduce the characters, introduce the world that they're going to be in, introduce what they're like on camera. If you're doing scripted, that's a very, very different realm. And in that case, maybe you do a web series that you could stitch together as a pilot if that works out. So again, thinking ahead, okay, so I'm going to shoot, how many minutes am I going to shoot and what can I do with it? If you shot 15 minutes and you're out of money and you just can't do anymore, you just got 15 minutes of footage, may or may not work. Is a pilot the best way to sell that scripted format? It really just depends what the material is and what you're trying to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And who you're trying to sell to.
Yeah, of
Because with
course.
scripted, a lot of the times you're trying to look for a more experienced showrunner to come on board to sort of help you get over the
And that's
the
more
pedigree
writing,
hump.
right? I mean, I don't know. The networks, from my experience, networks don't buy scripted based on anything that's produced. It's
exactly. So for scripted, if you're going to put together a lookbook or a deck or, some sort of animatic, it's more about attracting your creative partners if you are a new showrunner. Because those are the people you need to be able to get you over the investment hump.
Yeah.
Jane, you had talked about one alternative to producing a sizzle reel and approaching broadcasters for a reality show as being putting it up on the web. How would you go about doing that? How can a potential producer that has a reality show idea do something, put it on the web, and more importantly, get people to see it?
Well, what I was discussing is that, rather than thinking of content as simply, a 30-minute show on a network, if you have an interesting world and interesting characters and you can create a web series around those characters, it might not look exactly like a reality show, but you're engaging with your fan base and building a fan base that's interested in that. And there are plenty of sort of digital outlets that are now sort of crowdsourcing episodic television. There are ways to build that. And then when you go into the network, you can say like, look, we have this many followers. This is what's going on. This is how we would blow it up into a proper half-hour reality show. But
Haley, do companies like Fremantle and Endemol Shine, some of the other ones, do you scour the web looking for potential short series that you can then acquire or help mold and stitch together and develop?
I do. I mean, I think it's not like, I don't know if I'm scouring the web, but I think there's a certain amount of, talking about scripted for a second here, of series that will travel because of that story and that narrative. And I actually did come upon one last year, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's called Blue, and it was produced by one of the 100 funded YouTube channels. You guys remember that a few years ago? Called Wigs. And it stars Julia Stiles. And it was shot across 3 seasons, and it follows this young single mother who moonlights as an escort at night. And because it was so successful and they did so many short form episodes, there was enough content there, about 11 hours of content. So I went back to them and I said, this is amazing narrative structure. It's written by Rodrigo Garcia, who did Albert Nobbs, and he created In Treatment. So it had the package there we're talking about, right? So it had the on-camera talent, and had the writer, and it had the executive producer, John Avnet, who did Risky Business and Fried Green Tomatoes and lots of other things. So I said, if I cover the cost for you to edit this for me into 10 hours, A, and B, if you geo-block it to the US, meaning it's only available online in the US, can I take this out and try and sell it internationally? And they said yes, and we launched it at MIPCOM last year, which is one of the biggest television distribution production conferences. And we sold it to Lifetime in the UK, and it premiered a month ago, and it's rating 550% above their ABC One average, which is amazing. So, the license fee we sold it for is a lot less than what Lifetime would pay for a US cable show, but it was a lot of money for the producers, and it was all upside. So, yes, I look for those, but volume is essential. I have to have volume. I can't sell 2 hours of content.
Do you know if they tried to sell it as a scripted network show before they turned it into a web series?
I don't know if they did that. I know they tried to sell the finished tape in the US, but yeah. But Wigs was created. It was, like I said, it was with 100 funded YouTube, and it's all high-end premium scripted content about women as the protagonist.
So that's a great example of how the democratization of the web permits a show to get created and sold. There was no US broadcaster involved. There was nobody involved. Now, admittedly, they had Julia Stiles in it, who I don't know if she came cheap or not, but she's a name people have heard of. But somebody created this show on their own, and Haley saw it and helped them put it together, and then sold it as a series, which is tremendous. That's the kind of thing that didn't exist 15 years ago. And that's a wonderful move towards really helping independent producers. That's exciting. Jane, Mark, your company now works with brands, and one of the things you do is you work with brands and help turn what they're doing into content. Talk a little bit about how that works, please.
No, it's good.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's start with how we define brands, because obviously when we talk about brands, we're not talking about Tide detergent, but usually talking about people or artists or material that have some sort of ambition for filmed content, but have not been able to grow it or expand it. So I'll give you an example. We're involved with this film called The Butterfly Circus, which, if you don't know, is one of the most viewed short films ever made. It's been viewed 40 million times, and it gets viewed 1 million times every month. And it's a 20-minute short, and the people that created it, husband and wife team, the Weigels, wanted very much to expand it into a feature film. And they had this great ambition. They had no particular skill set or relationships to do this, but they'd made this incredible short. It had this experience. So when they came to us, we thought, if someone had come to us with a novel, with the rights to a novel, and it sold 40 million copies, then we'd probably all, as producers, would say, yeah, okay, we'll definitely into that. So we worked with them for about a year as they were developing the screenplay, giving them our expertise about how to expand the short into a feature-length script that would give us the best shot for attracting, elements of financing, distribution, and cast, because Josh is going to direct it. He directed the short. So that is one example of sort of a lateral move from one medium into another on a piece of branded material.
Yeah, and we look at, it's not unique, but that we're at a time in sort of the history of the entertainment business where you can look at intellectual property brands as a 360-degree experience. On the other side, another example, we have a graphic novel that we got before it got published. We happen to think that the world's, a wonderful world with really rich characters and can be expanded into almost any media. So we look at that as, how do we want to roll this out? Because it can be any number of different types of content, and are working with the guys who happen to be screenwriters who decided to make it a graphic novel first, And we're very like-minded about how we want to go into the marketplace and are talking to a number of other potential like-minded financiers where while you're developing a film of it, that you're also doing a variety of other offshoots.
Okay, good, thank you. One of the areas in the title of our seminar deals with specials. How does one go about putting together a special, packaging, seeking funding, distributing? Because it doesn't really fall into the tried and true, do a series, do a reality show method. What's the world like with specials?
We did try to put together a thing of Operation
Yeah.
Calm. You should describe.
We have sometimes we have a lot of sort of producers that we've worked with in other fields. And once we made the television show, they came knocking and we started talking to a producer who also in their personal lives was very involved with homeless vets. And we actually got pretty close to ramping a, like 2-hour special event, celebrity laden event to focus on homeless vets and potentially do sort of more of an extreme home makeover type rebuild of a particular sort of section of a town. And ultimately, there are budgets for specials. People like them, they're short form, they're easy to package, they're easy to sell to advertisers. It just ultimately, right, that particular cause wasn't where the networks were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just in a sense like a one-off independent film, but just happens to be for a TV production. You would go and shop it just like you would a TV show. You'd find a broadcaster. If your special is about nature, you've got certain buyers. If your special is about, a strange personality, you got different buyers. And then the network's going to come up with a number they're willing to pay. If you can make it for that number, great. If not, you got to find other sources. So if you look at like the parachute jump that Discovery did a few years ago, the money came from Red Bull for big publicity. Discovery paid some money. Other sponsors paid money. You literally have to package it together to make it all worthwhile. But, the networks are open to it if it meets their demographics. It has that element that lets them sell it, lets them get that promotional push. And then, the problem with a special as a producer is you get one shot and the upside's really limited, to be honest with you, because there is no second season. There really is an ancillary. You're doing it for some other reason. You're doing it because it's a product. Passion, yeah.
And I think it's about finding people that share the passion.
Yeah,
I mean, we were able to find a number of celebrities that is a cause for them.
With a special, will the network generally want to own it, or will they be willing to pay a license fee and let the producer own it?
They'll let you own it, but they'll own all the rights in the U.S. and
Depends how good you are at negotiating.
Well, if you have a good lawyer, if you know of any. But no, I mean, the ownership question, it applies to everything. It's about, it comes down to money. It comes down to, are you asking a network to pay 100%? They're going to own it. They might let you go out and sell foreign if they get a really big share. If you come to the table with other money, then the conversation can be had about split rights, and then you own foreign and they own domestic, and you work all that out. But generally, in unscripted, the networks own it. In scripted, it's different. Their studio affiliate owns it. It's a different accounting group. But at the end of the day, it's the same.
The other thing, I mean, rather than specials, is sort of the rise of the limited series, which actually is very relevant to packaging, because the limited series now does allow you to bring in a high-level talent, because if the material is strong enough, of course, then you can bring them in because they know that they're not committing to
Well, it's a
years
returnable
of,
limited series,
Mhm.
which is the best.
Yeah.
and that they can,
Yeah.
you can maybe punch above your weight in terms of talent, because you're not signing them up for the next 5 to 7 years.
And the one thing just to add about specials, for me, it's about event programming. So if we could market something internationally, like if it's the 50th anniversary of something, or it's the 1-year anniversary of like Michael Jackson's death, for example, and you have exclusive access to his family and never before seen footage, or something that you can make an event, the special can actually garner quite a lot of money internationally. But it has to be relevant, it has to be universal and travel.
Will a company like Fremantle, if someone comes to you with, here, I have this special, or I have this show, will Fremantle put in money in return for international rights?
If it's good.
Event programming?
Yes. Sorry.
Those event programming?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Those-
mean, if they really do have, people committed to be on camera that have never been on camera before about an issue or a happening or an anniversary that it's going to travel, then absolutely.
Look, I mean, she's looking for the same thing to sell that you would expect. She wants to be able to have a big billboard and a
Yep.
name and a topic. It's just like any, TV show, motion picture, marketable elements. So
Yeah.
the more of those, the easier it is for Haley to
Mhm.
just to go up the chain and justify money in it, because she knows she can use those
Yeah.
elements to sell to the Russian, to the Germans. It's
Mhm.
everybody's looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
So
But it's always important to keep in mind that, I mean, you'll hear this over and over. It takes the same amount of effort to sell 1 hour as it does 20 hours, and you make 20 times as much money usually. So specials are hard. They have to be really, really unique and good, and they're going to be, sort of headline grabbing.
It's in the word special,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Has to be very special.
right, and you generally get one viewing, and then it's pointless. you
Yeah,
know?
right, exactly.
And we've talked a little bit about packaging, what a broadcaster wants, what a financier may want for an independent film. But Haley, in particular, have mentioned the international possibilities for something, which these days is key. How does somebody go about finding out what the international market wants? In other words, if someone's coming up with a show idea, how do they learn whether it's something that's going to be saleable in the international market?
It's a lot easier to think about what the international market doesn't want and sort of back into it. Comedy is really tough. And I know everyone's really heard this, but comedy is very local. It doesn't always travel. So that could be challenging. Dramas, huge, hour-long dramas is what the international marketplace really wants. And more so now than ever, because in the past year, 2, 3 years, what's become really sexy and cool is serialized drama, high concept dramas, which is what I love to watch. And that's what local broadcasters also, like RTL in Germany, like for example, they do their own big serialized dramas, and that works for them. Those are the kind of dramas that garner the awards, that help with the brand identity. What makes money internationally is repeatable procedural dramas. I cannot stress that more. It's just, and
Just like
all the
your-
cool showrunners and writers and talent, aren't doing those, and there is a serious deficit for them. So.
We literally just set one up, apart from the fact that it was good, we think, but the person who bought it literally said, I need this. It's an international oriented company.
Mhm.
It says, this is what I need, like bad.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
yeah.
And they'll pay a lot of money for the serialized dramas, but they'll have one run, it'll do really well, and they'll try and repeat it, and it just, so it's, I think we're going more and more away from that too.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this just gets a little sensitive, but I think you also have to consider programming that's geared toward specific ethnic group.
Yep.
Can
glad
have
you're
a
covering
challenge.
that one.
Yeah, no,
Thank you
because
for
you
that.
can't. Yeah, no problem. But it goes back to what kind of screenplay do you want to write? What kind of project do you want to do? And if you're going to do a project about urban life in Philadelphia, unless it's The Wire and you break through that.
Baltimore.
Baltimore. So I don't want to bring up Baltimore. It's a bad city. But the point is,
Empire. Empire, what was like 23 million in the finale?
Yeah,
or something
how's
like
it doing in the
that? In
national?
Australia, flatlined.
Yeah.
I mean, just absolutely flatlined.
right.
Which
Yeah,
is
what
really
people-
interesting.
So just keep that in mind. The market for your product. What's the market of my product? I'm writing a screenplay. Am I going to be able to get 50% of the budget from foreign?
Yeah.
Is my topic such that that's justified, or it's not? And then you just adjust accordingly.
One way to look at foreign now is compared to the US to a certain extent. How many shows do you watch on television that were made in other countries? Probably not many. You watch the networks, you watch the cable channels, by and large, the US shows with a couple co-productions with the BBC and maybe some others thrown in. We tend to look at the international market as, boy, if we make something over here, they're going to want it. But if you go to France, they have their own local programming that fills up most of the schedules of broadcasters, because most people want to watch people speaking in their language. And then we come over with our shows and we try to sell it there. There are just not as many slots. So everything that the panel has talked about making the shows marketable, making them special, is really important for international. And people around the world generally want to see people who are at least a little bit like them. And so for a country to want to buy something, it has to be relatable to them.
To the procedural element, I was talking to a woman who's been a big showrunner in procedurals, and now she's actually been commissioned by a French company to write directly for the French audience. So she's actually making tons of money, having a great time.
She writing in
Does-
French and.
No, she's writing in the English procedural for French television and is happy as a clam. So there is, for established, once you can get established in the space, there is this huge demand, and they're actually skipping over the US networks and kind of going directly to showrunners to provide that content because there's such a hunger for it.
Yeah, yeah. And I've worked with people who have gone around the world developing original projects, some of which are based on US projects, but some of which is just based on the fact that they know how to produce good US shows and they're translating that to other countries.
Yeah.
And that's a marketable skill.
Yeah, I mean, what we talk about procedurals, but what we're really kind of touching on is shows that have value re-airing.
Yep.
Because it's all about the repeats for the broadcasters, particularly foreign broadcasters. So even a show like Survivor, it's a great show when it airs, but as a rerun, it's pretty pointless because you know who's going to win. And House of Cards is a great show to watch once, but once you know what's going to happen, it's not like Law and Order that you just could keep watching and watching, you put it in the background. So it's just, again, when you're thinking about what kind of project do I want to do, am I doing a self-contained project, self-contained episode? There's a lot of value at that. It's not as easy as people think it is. And the upside internationally can be there.
Yeah.
But if you want to do House of Cards, gotta do House of Cards, but keep in mind,
The ROI it's really about the ROI.
yeah, the way you can really succeed and what it really means for the show to succeed is limited.
I think that's a perfect description of the market. Very good. Haley, Fremantle has offices around the world. How much of what
Indeed.
you do is tailored towards buying something that your offices around the world can then take and make into local language productions?
From a format perspective, we have 26, I think it is now, offices around the world that are producing and developing. And this is the non-scripted space. Some of our bigger shows like American Idol and X Factor and Got Talent and things like this. So when we look at a format, that is the only thing that we really look at, is something that can actually really travel to 15, 20 plus territories. I think people throw the word format around a lot and misuse it. Because, you could have a debate on whether something like Mob Wives is a format. I don't think it is, but some people do. So I would say for us, it's about a show that's going to be a big show on a free-to-air, terrestrial broadcaster that, we have flying producers, as we call them, which are consultants that are experts in all the formats that we sell. And they fly around the world and spend time with all the local productions to ensure that they're implementing the format properly and appropriately and maintaining the brand. So for Fremantle, it's a bigger type of show. It doesn't mean that other smaller formats can't travel, but they're more limited.
But if it's possible to give an answer to this, and I don't know, what percentage of the reality shows for U.S. television translate into selling the actual U.S. version of the show around the world? And and what percentage might translate into format, and what percentage just have no real value internationally? And that, I don't know if
So
that's a fair question or
the
not.
first question is the U.S. canned episodes travel?
Yes.
Well,
You
a
had
lot of the
mentioned
U.S. cable, the U.S. cable broadcasters have deals with their affiliate channels. So, the international affiliate channels will cover a percentage of the U.S. cable production budget in exchange for distribution rights to air the U.S. version on their platform. So those are almost volume deals and output deal kind of scenarios. So, I would say probably 50% actually make it on air. There's a significant amount of, from the bigger cable and network shows. In terms of format, less than,
Survivor.
no, there's quite a few, but
Yeah,
I mean,
but
less
they're-
than 0.01%.
Yeah. Yeah, because look,
on the format side?
yeah, because a lot of reality show docu-soaps, they're not formats. They are following a certain
Yeah.
group of people. So are there docu-soaps in other countries? Yes, but I wouldn't count that. So you're really talking about shows that create a situation or a setting and then running with it. So a game show, a competition show.
Yeah. Or like
So-
Project Runway, for example, we've sold that into 23, there's been 23 local versions of that,
Yeah.
which is a lot for a
Yeah,
show like that.
Apprentice,
Yeah.
it's all over the world with, local Trumps. Some are more colorful than others. Shark Tank is around the world. It really is a show that it's those kind of shows that you look at the show and you take away who's on screen and it still works because everybody's got a role and you just got to plug in the role that you can find locally and the machine works.
Yeah.
Do you make, will a company like Fremantle make more money by selling formats of a show around the world or by selling the actual US show around the world, licensing the US show?
Good question. Very much depends on the show.
Okay.
It really does, so
Okay. We'll
no
go.
comment.
That's fine. No, we'll go a couple more minutes and then I'll open it up for questions. Mark and Jane, what are you, first of all, are you actively involved in developing reality projects? What's the current taste of the market? Is it too varied a question to answer because it's broadcaster dependent, or is there any kind of
Well,
theme
it's definitely
now?
broadcaster dependent. The first question is yes, we are selectively. We're still feature producers, but our foray into reality with The Quest, which was sort of a hybrid, was definitely a hybrid, not even sort of a hybrid. But there are, if there is a world or a human being that we find compelling, we're happy to dive in and help, develop a sizzle reel and take it around. But I think everybody's very varied. I mean, obviously the rush for millennial eyeballs is exciting for everyone, but I think that everybody has a different mandate.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
No, agreed.
I mean, I think big character is still a thing,
Yeah.
but you hear the word big character a little bit less and less, which is nice because, it's going back, I think, a little bit more to format, to the Top Chefs, to the Runways, to the America's Next Top Model, like those sort of breakout hits in the beginning of reality that are formats that can travel, that become big franchises that make a lot of money and get a bunch of sponsors. So you had the Duck Dynasty era, which is still there, but I think that networks are more open now to commercial series than just big characters.
Yeah, I mean, what you find is, with even though you have tons of channels, the actual airtime for reality is getting squeezed out on, I think, on broadcast network, unless it's a game show or an incredibly formatted thing like a Survivor or The Bachelor. It's not going to be in the air. I don't see a broadcast network doing a docuseries. You have cable networks that are moving away from unscripted. I mean, AMC is all but shut down. The A&E Lifetime History, they've got the TNT's essentially done. Hope not. There are, the A&E is putting more scripted, more special programming. So, and on the other side is that they are looking for the runaway hit. They're looking for home runs, from my perspective. So they'll do, even if they do pick up your show, it'll be a 6-episode order, a 4-episode order. The show will run, even if it does decent ratings, chances are it won't get picked up because it didn't pop and explode. And my sense is that the networks would rather take the money it would cost to a second season to try it on another show and see if that pops.
Yeah, and we're in a great moment for scripted television now because there's second uses and people are starting to realize that you're not just a one broadcast model anymore as you have over the top. And so I think it makes more sense to invest wisely in scripted at this point because there's a longer tail to that content than there is for unscripted. Because even if you have a runaway hit in broadcast, as we've talked about, the repeatability or the desire on a Saturday night to download a bunch of reality and binge watch it is a little bit, it's not sort of the first thing you think of doing on a Saturday night.
Well, that's research for you. She works on Saturday
Yeah, I
nights.
have to.
Yeah, for sure.
Is it fair to say that the scripted series business would be the toughest one for an independent producer to break into because of the way
For
the
a
business
what
operates?
they call a non-writing producer, which basically is most people, yeah, because you're giving yourself, the further away you start from the end goal, the more steps you have to take, the more variables there are for you to potentially not get it right. So if you want to try to just even get into the scripted game, you have to ultimately have a showrunner, a writing producer to help you just get into that sale. What we found, because we are effectively non-writing producers, although not exclusively, if you have life rights, if there's some kind of IP basis, that enables you to punch above your weight. That actually evens the playing field a little bit, because if you really latch onto something that's motivating, then you can help clutter bust your way higher up the food chain than you might otherwise, because your IP has given you sort of a lift.
I mean, our show that we've been alluding to, the procedural, is based on a true life person who we had met, and we talked to her and asked whether or not we could, buy her life rights.
And you'll be pleased we got it in writing.
Oh, okay.
And I say that in a joking way, but my brother Joel, who's here, he runs a weekly networking thing, and we were quite sad. There was a reality show that we were kind of godparenting just as advisors, and the person who cut their sizzle reel, which was essentially their whole, it was a docu-series based on personalities in an environment, and he didn't get it in writing. He cut them an awesome sizzle reel, and then the people that commissioned him screwed him. So now he's sitting there, very sad, and he doesn't have any leg to stand on. And sure, he could try to call the network and say, don't listen to that pitch. I cut that sizzle reel. And sure, maybe he'll do that, but he probably won't do that. So he did all this work. But it was a real life person. It was a totally, you always get it in writing.
Yeah,
And if
that
someone doesn't want to
happens
give
more
it
than
to you
you
in
think.
writing, by the way, and I say this oftentimes, not to become your group psychiatrist, but if someone says, don't let people emotionally blackmail you, like especially if you're dealing with friends or peers, like that's just bullshit, straight out bullshit. If you're working with a peer, Jay and I have known each other almost 25 years. If you're working with a peer and they do not want to put it in some kind of just basic, simple, mutually respectful writing, then that's just not right. And they either have some sort of neurotic problem, or they're not trusting that down the road there should be some protection for everybody, and it's just going to end in tears. And I'm only passionate about it because we've all seen it happen multiple times. And if we leave you with nothing else in this room, like don't make a needless mistake. We're all going to make enough genuine mistakes, like that you can't help, but don't make needless mistakes. Should be avoided. There's no excuse.
Yeah, I mean, if you think it's uncomfortable to ask for a piece of paper now, it's even worse when there's real money involved, and it's a hard truth, but sometimes you really find out what your partners are really like and what they're made of when you start asking to put something in writing, and you want to find that out now.
And when you're a new kid on the block, especially,
Yes,
and you roll into a network who actually is leaning in, and then the rights issues seem fuzzy. Sometimes life's too short for everyone, so you can lose that golden opportunity if you don't have your
house
ship
in
in
order.
shape.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of good advice given by the panelists today, but if you leave here with nothing more than what's been said in the last 2 minutes, it's well worth it, because it does happen. We've got about 4 minutes left, I think, which is not going to be time for all the hands that I see raised, but we'll try a couple, and then we have to turn the room over to the next one. Let's go. The women in the glasses there. Keep in mind, I have a spotlight shining in my face, so you.
So based on what you just said in the last 2 minutes, wasn't the guy who was on a show, and everybody's jumping on it, like William Morris and big, huge companies that you mentioned earlier.
Great.
Are doing shows that are active, and I have nothing in writing with anybody, because they're my friends and a producer and a showrunner. So I think that one's where a lawyer comes.
Don't do that. Yeah, stop and don't do anything else until you get it. And let me call someone else just because
Get an
you can talk.
attorney.
Yeah, get an
Yeah.
attorney.
Talk afterward, yeah,
Yeah.
but do
Immediately.
that. I want to try to keep it to questions that are more general, but feel free, right there in the front.
Speaking of a leverage, if for someone like me, if I'm finishing a graduate school at UCLA, I also work for Los Angeles Police Department. If I'm developing a show set in law enforcement and human trafficking in the world, how much leverage would I have considering myself and all the contacts I have in that field?
I mean, I think that if you can find one of your contacts to sort of contract with you to be able to provide you with an endless list of stories and cases that are coming out of human trafficking in Los Angeles, That's the important thing, because I think for us in our particular situation that we're talking about, we know that we will have years of cases that a showrunner can avail themselves of, also in an interesting world. So, and our whole job, our first buyer is a great showrunner. And we need to
Yeah.
make that,
We have to
some
sell him or
some
her.
showrunners have their own ideas and they're never going to want anything to do with other people's ideas. Some showrunners need ideas and are happy when they've got endless amounts of cases that they can just weave their magic through. So I think that it's great that you have both sides of the coin, but if you can find someone who is also able to do it, because don't forget their privacy issues, et cetera, and all of that. But if you can find somebody that can be your talent. Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
let's go. I think we probably have time for one more question. Let's go second row, gentlemen, second in.
What's the lookbook?
Oh, a lookbook is like, it's a visual representation of the project. So for example, it will usually have, if it's for a movie, you know, it might have bios on your producers, on your director, on your writer. It would have images, like say it's set, we made a movie in Alaska. So it might have, you know, images of Alaska and bios on the character, if it's based on a real life story. It's basically like a sales tool.
It's a sales tool that also defines tone and scope. You know, obviously, you know, we did something called The Frozen Ground, which Mark was alluding to. It was about a true life serial killer that killed a bunch of people in the 80s. But our director was a first-time director, and he very clearly outlined the tone, the feel, comparative movies that represented what he was looking for. He had some of the evidence of the case. It was a wildly compelling thing that got, you know, the agencies around town very excited to give us their top-level talent to sit down with a first-time director. So it's your best representation. If you, God forbid, got hit by a car tomorrow, that if somebody picked it up, they could know exactly what you wanted to make.
And also to end on a kind of a sales note, what it also does is it doesn't allow people to make faulty assumptions. Like, don't assume that just as good as your script may be or your teleplay may be, frame it for people. Don't leave anything to chance that you can possibly control. So if you have a tone in mind, hammer that. Like, you don't want to, they'll get that it's a simple plan. No, they won't. They might, but why should you take that chance?
All right. Do we have more time for another question, or shall we cut it now? Okay, one more all the way in the back there.
Could you talk about the pitfalls or the benefits of doing a live set like the Bruce Jenner interview just happened? Twitter was shut down on Friday night. Is that something where ABC said now we're not trying to split this into a show, or is this just a one-time thing?
Did you hear that clearly, or should we?
I mean, yeah, I think
Okay.
in Bruce Jenner, because he's already has another show with E, right? But I think if a network does a special and it pops, you better believe that they, you know, probably have exclusivity on the option. And if they don't, you know, there could be other networks coming in to bid on it. And I mean, I think yes.
Yeah, I mean, and look, and you as a producer, if you're putting together a special that might pop and there are people that might benefit from that exposure, then you want to attach yourself to the extent you can, whether it's they're exclusive to you or if they've got a book and you're going to make that book a household name, get a piece of that book. You know, the networks would, so you should as well as the producer. You really got to look at if you're in a situation where the TV show is part of a larger picture, how are you benefiting from that larger picture? How are you being involved, and how is that TV show driving the rest of the components? And if you're the television producer, you're responsible for that, you should share.
Yeah. It's kind of the Bethany Frankel
Bethany
argument
Frankel,
that everyone
yeah.
always talks about, right? Is
Yes.
that like she is a skinny girl brand that's made bajillions of dollars and Bravo
Bravo-
didn't get anything.
Well, they were dumb to put them on screen.
Well,
Yeah. Well, thank you to our panelists. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you to the audience. Enjoy the rest of your day.
So you're here.